Namaste, friends. My name is Mudra Verma, and my topic for today is postural mindfulness in yoga asanas in order to prevent injuries. Now, this is a very vast and a very extensive topic. Nevertheless, I'll be trying my best to do justice to this topic and bring out the key components as far as possible. Now, one recent phenomenon is that there is an increasing number of yoga competitions, yoga challenges that have been taking place since the last couple of years. So much so that every 2 or 3 months there is an announcement of some kind of competition or some kind of challenge. This, despite the fact that competition in itself is paradoxical to the true meaning or the real essence of yoga. Now, everywhere we go, we find yoga students, practitioners, or even people who are relatively new to yoga clamoring to learn the so called advanced asanas. Now, why is that? It could be because these advanced practices are part of their syllabus or part of their curriculum, or it could be simply because they see their friends, their acquaintances doing it and they want to do it too. Or maybe simply because people tend to be inspired by those picture perfect Instagram yogis and yoginis who are inundating the net with some very beautiful postures. Now, if we were to introspect, it will not be long before we realize that the driving force behind all of this is nothing but ego. An ego, my friends, according to yoga philosophy, is a klesha. Ego is an affliction, it is something that has to be done away with if you want to make progress on your yogic path. If you are driven by ego all the time, definitely sooner or later you will be deviating from the yogic path and you may also be putting yourself in the way of some kind of damage or injury, not only at a physical level but also at a mental level. So, ego is something that has to be done away with if you wish to make progress in the right direction. And this ego, my friends, is one of the leading causes of injury in yoga asana. And where there is ego, there is excessive effort. There is unmindful effort. You are simply putting in efforts without being mindful of what your own body structure is, what your own body's biomechanics are. You're completely unmindful of your own limitations, your own level of fitness, strength, or even flexibility for that matter. Because you're so much driven and so much consumed by ego that you've completely forgotten to take into account all of these parameters, and you simply need to reach a particular standard which has been set. And this excessive effort, this unmindful effort, is yet again a major cause of injuries happening in yoga asanas. Now, coming to the philosophical point of view, Patanjali Muni in Patanjali Yoga Darshan has given a very succinct definition of yoga asana. And also, in yoga philosophy, asana pertains to a meditative posture. An asana is defined as sthira sukham asana, meaning asana is a posture that is steady, still, and which gives a lot of comfort. An asana is something that has to be done with utmost ease, with utmost fluidity, and you ought to be absolutely comfortable in an asana. Now, having said that, Patanjali Muni further goes on to talk about a technique for mastering the asanas. Now, what is this technique? This technique is Prayatna Shaithilya Ananta Samapatti. Now let us understand what this means. Prayatna Shaithilya means that one has to overcome the initial struggle. One has to overcome the initial tension. One has to overcome the undue efforts that you may be putting in advertently or inadvertently in performance of an asana. There has to be a relaxation, there has to be a slackening of effort, not only at a physical level but also at a mental level. And this is the right manner in which you ought to perform an asana. This is the right manner to gain mastery over an asana. And when an asana is performed in this manner, the result is tato dvandvan bhigatah. Dvandva. Dvandva meaning conflict. It means dualities. So when an asana is practiced in this manner, keeping the principles in mind, you will be overcoming the obstacles, the conflicts, and the dualities in your life. The dualities can be something like happiness and sadness, pleasure or pain, success or failure. So when you are practicing an asana, you will learn to accept these dualities as a part of your life, and you will also be learning to transcend them. Now let me make it a little more clear. Now suppose if I were to ask you to think about a happy moment in your life. Now you cannot conceptualize a happy moment until and unless you know what sadness is. Now similarly, if I ask you to think about light, you cannot know what light is until and unless you are clear about what darkness is. So in our life, there are conflicts, there are dualities all around us. It is not possible to have an existence without these dualities. And when you are practicing asanas in the right manner, sticking to the principles, you overcome these dualities. You learn to go beyond them, you learn to transcend them, you learn to accept them. So when you are performing an asana in such a manner, you are in actuality training your mind to reach a certain state of equilibrium, to reach a certain state of equanimity. Now the question will arise in your mind that how is it that by the practice of asana we can reach such a state of mental steadiness, such a state of mental equanimity? Well, the answer is that when you are performing an asana or when you are putting your body into postures which are hitherto unaccustomed by your body, you are actually training your body to adjust to discomfort to the extent that after a point of time it starts getting comfortable. After a point of time you start experiencing some kind of ease, some kind of comfort level also in that discomfort. And when you are practicing in this manner, when you are practicing your asanas, you are therefore training your mind to be acceptful of any kind of circumstances, any kind of situations, and face them. So this is why it is said that when you are practicing asana, you are overcoming or you are learning to adapt to all kind of dualities, all kind of conflicts that you may be faced with. Also, in a Hatha Yogic text, which is called as Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it is said that the practice of asana results in sthairyam, arogyam, angalaghavam. Now what is sthairyam? Sthairyam pertains to steadiness. Steadiness not only at a physical level but also mental steadiness. Arogyam. Arogyam means a disease-free condition of your body, a disease-free condition of your mind. Angalaghavan. When you are practicing asana in the right manner, according to the principles, you feel a certain amount of lightness in your body. Further, coming back to Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Patanjali Muni says that when the asanas, or rather when the limbs of yoga are performed in a proper manner, when all the limbs of yoga, namely yama, niyam, asana, pranayam, pratyahar, dharana, dhyan and samadhi, when all of these limbs are practiced in a systematic manner, it leads to the destruction of impurities of the mind. Now these impurities of the mind are kleshas, avidya, asmita, rag, dvesh, abhinivesh. Now I'll not go into detail of what the kleshas are. You can simply understand them as something which is to be done away with. Other than that, your mental impurities can be hatred, animosity, anger, greed, pride, anything that is negative, too much of fickle mindedness, indecisiveness. So, all these impurities can be destroyed, can be done away with if you're practicing all the limbs of yoga in a systematic manner. And when you are practicing in this kind of a manner, what it leads to is it leads to a dawn of a spiritual illumination. And when there is a dawn of such a spiritual illumination, it takes you closer and closer to the realization of your true self, your real essence, your real nature. Now, having said this, how many of us actually align ourselves with this yoga philosophy when we are doing our practice? Or for that matter, how many of us actually align ourselves to the fact that yoga is a qualitative inner experience which is highly individualistic in nature? Now, most of us are consumed by quantifying the yoga practices. And when we are simply quantifying the yoga practices, we are not progressing in the right direction. Yoga is a qualitative inner experience. It is not something that has to be quantified. And when we are simply going on quantifying the yoga practices, like I did 108 Surya Namaskar, I did pranayam for 2 hours today, we are deviating from the right path. And sooner or later, this can also be cause of some kind of damage at the mental level and could be also at the physical level. Now friends, coming to the technical side of things. Now injuries in yoga can also happen due to improper alignment and due to inadequate or insufficient instructions. Now, as yoga students and yoga practitioners, we have to be very clear about what alignment means in yoga. First and foremost, alignment in yoga begins with the aligning of your body, your mind, and the breath. This is first and the foremost. And now coming to alignment at a purely physical level, alignment is the positioning of your body parts in a precise manner according to your own structure. I'll repeat this again. Coming to the physical part of alignment, alignment is the positioning of your body parts in a precise manner according to your own structure in order to minimize the risk of injury and to maximize the benefits. Now, if your alignment is not right, you're certainly going to invite injuries. So, if you're one of those people who constantly feel like I want to practice how my teacher does, or I want to practice like those Instagram yogis and yoginis who are posting picture perfect yoga poses all the time, you are certainly putting yourself up for injuries. This is because each person is unique in terms of their body structure, unique in terms of the elasticity in their connective tissues, unique in terms of the range of motion in their joints, unique in terms of the load bearing capacity of their joints, and so many other things. Now, coming to alignment, since we are on the topic of alignment, I'll be giving you a couple of points of alignment which you can keep in mind when you are doing your practice. Now, what is the right alignment in a sitting posture? This is something that we will see first. Now, when you are sitting in any posture, could be a meditative posture or could be any cross-leg posture, ensure that your base is broad. Once you have established a broad base, you will ensure that your spine is erect. You will ensure that you're feeling tall in your spine. If at all you feel that your lower back is rounding, what you could do is you could take a block like this and you could sit on it. And immediately you will feel a nice length, you will feel a nice tallness in your spine. Also, let me make it clear that by an erect spine, what I mean is that you will be maintaining the natural curvature of your spine. From the spine, let us now come to the rib cage. Now, many times what I see is that the rib cage is flaring out like this. We do not want that. The rib cage and the pelvis should be more or less aligned, and there should be a good amount of space that is created between your rib cage and your pelvis. If your chest is collapsing all the time like this, what it does is that it is constricting the diaphragm. And when the diaphragm is constricted, your breathing will not happen in a proper manner. So it is very important for you to ensure that the chest is lifted sufficiently, but at the same time the ribs or the rib cage should not be flaring out or jutting out like this. Now coming to the shoulders, your shoulders will be rolled back and down, your neck will be long, your chin will be parallel to the floor. We do not want the jutting out of the chin or the head like this. You can simply push it back, ensure that the chin is parallel to the floor. Having done that, you'll ensure that your face is absolutely soft, absolutely relaxed, and finally, you'll ensure that you're breathing in a proper yogic manner. Now, this was the right alignment in the sitting posture. Now, coming to a standing posture, I'm not sure if I'll be able to demonstrate the complete standing posture. Nevertheless, I'll give it a try. Now, coming to a standing posture, you will ensure that there is equal weight distribution between the front of the feet as well as the back of the feet. Also, what you will ensure is that there are certain points in your feet which ought to be making contact with the floor sufficiently, or they should be making contact with the floor really well. Now, the first 2 points are the balls of the feet. The area just under your toes here, this is the balls of the feet. So this area as well as the heel area, the area on either side of your heels should be pressing into the floor really well. So this will also ensure that the natural arch of your foot is maintained. Now coming to your toes, when you are in a standing position, you will first be lifting your toes like this, spread the toes and then fix them firmly on your mat or on the floor. Now coming to a second point. Now many times we are instructed that keep both your feet parallel to each other. Now largely this is very common and it will be very easy for a large number of people, for maximum people. But for some people who have a certain amount of internal rotation in their knees, or maybe an external rotation in their knees, technically which is called as a varum or a valgum orientation, they will find it very difficult to keep both the feet parallel to each other. So what my suggestion would be that ensure that your knees are pointing absolutely forward. Ensure that there is no rotation at all in the knees and that the knees are pointing absolutely forward. Once the position of the knees is established, let your feet follow the knees. This is it. This is what you need to keep in mind with respect to the feet. Now coming to the knees, when you are in a standing position, you will ensure that your kneecaps are slightly pulled up. And how will you pull up the kneecaps? You will pull up your kneecaps by engaging your quadricep muscles, which are muscles on the front of your thighs, moderately. Okay. Now from your knees, we'll now come to the pelvis and the core, which is very important. Now, speaking of the pelvis, there are 3 positions of the pelvis. One is an anterior pelvic tilt, one is a posterior pelvic tilt, and lastly, there is neutral pelvis. Now let me show you what all these three positions are. Now anterior pelvic tilt is where your lumbar area is pushed forward excessively, like this. So there is an accentuated lumbar curve or a lumbar lordosis. So this is called as an anterior pelvic tilt. And now the posterior pelvic tilt is something that is completely the opposite of that. This. So posterior pelvic tilt will lead to a roundness in your back, rather the upper back, or a kyphotic posture. So this is a posterior pelvic tilt. This was an anterior pelvic tilt and this is a posterior pelvic tilt. Now somewhere in between is a neutral pelvis, and this is what we want in our standing postures or in the samasthiti. We do not want an anterior pelvic tilt. We do not want a posterior pelvic tilt, but what we want is a neutral pelvis. Now from the pelvis we'll come to the core. Your core will be moderately engaged. Now the moment you engage your core, that is when you pull in your belly slightly towards the spine, immediately you'll feel some kind of activation or some kind of engagement happening in your glutes or happening in your buttock muscles as well. So these were some additional points of alignment. The rest of the alignment points remain the same, which pertain to your rib cage, your chest, your shoulders, your neck, as well as your chin, and above all we come to breathing. So these were the points of alignment which you can keep in mind in your standing postures as well as your sitting postures. Now coming back to our main topic, the cause of injuries in yoga asana. I spoke about alignment, and now I'll be speaking about how improper or inadequate or insufficient instructions as well can be a cause of injury in yoga asanas. Now let me give you an example over here. Now suppose you are given instructions to start raising your hands, keeping them straight at the elbows, and continue raising your hands up till the upper arm touches the ear. Now for a lot of practitioners, it will be very easy to do this. You're simply lifting your hands up and you're bringing your upper arm close to the ear, so rather the upper arm is touching the ears. But for a certain amount of people, it will not be possible to do. They will be stuck somewhere here. Particularly those people who had some injuries, or maybe men who've got a very strong musculature in the upper back region or the shoulder region, they will not be able to reach all the way here. They'll be stuck somewhere here. Now, if these kind of people keep on persisting with their effort, sooner or later, you will be damaging maybe the rotator cuff muscles of your shoulder or maybe some kind of component of your shoulders. Therefore, once again, the answer here is a mindful awareness of your own body structure, your own musculature, in order to have a safe, a strong practice. Now, therefore, also for all yoga practitioners, it is very important to understand that the uniqueness and the structure of your bones to a large extent will determine your range of motion. Also, if you feel that the range of motion that you have is limited on account of your joints or limited on account of the joint mobility, then no amount of yoga will be able to change that. Now let me give you an example over here. Now speaking of knees, I'll give you an example of knee flexion here. Now the average range of knee flexion is very broad. Now the average range is somewhere around 125 degrees to 160 degrees. This is the average range of knee flexion. And also as we age, we tend to lose small amount of knee flexion. Now for everyday activities like maybe walking or climbing the stairs, or maybe sitting on a chair, getting out of a chair, or maybe even squatting, or getting out of a bathtub for that matter, such extreme ranges of knee flexion are not required. Now, for example, if you were sitting on your heels like this, or maybe if you were sitting on your heels in Vajrasana, the amount of knee flexion that is required here is approximately 160 to 170 degrees of knee flexion. Also, now moving from the heels, if you venture to sit between your feet like this, if you were to sit in the hero's pose or Virasana like I'm sitting now, I'm sitting between my feet like this. It requires almost 170 to 180 degrees of knee flexion. And what we just saw was that the average amount of knee flexion is 125 degrees to 160 degrees. So therefore, a lot of people on account of the limited joint mobility will not be able to do Vajrasana, they will not be able to do Virasana or the hero's pose, and then they have to accept it. They have to accept their end range. If the limitation is coming from your joints, you have to accept it, and you have to understand that no amount of yoga can change that. Now, secondly, what we also need to understand is that though we may be alike on the outside, that we all have the same two limbs, that is two legs, two hands, two eyes, two ears, etc. But on the inside, each one of us is unique, each one of us is inherently different, because of which no two postures are going to look alike. So, if you are the one who's constantly looking at your neighbor, or maybe if you are the one who's constantly looking at those yoga books, or maybe postures on the internet, and you're mindlessly trying to ape them, you'll sooner or later damage yourself. So keep in mind that no two people are alike. There are differences in their bone structure, there are differences in their musculature, there are differences in the elasticity, there are differences in the load bearing capacity, and so many things which will determine how the posture looks. And the same posture can look different for different individual, and there is no set right or no set wrong. It is very important for you to know that. Now coming to the third point. Now one very neglected way of protecting yourself from injuries is Sukshma Vyayam. Now, not all yoga practitioners give enough attention to loosening practices. Now, it is very, very important and very vital that you do these loosening practices, because when you are doing these loosening practices, you are taking your joints through their full range of motion. You're stimulating not only the production but also the movement of the synovial fluid. Now this synovial fluid is a viscous fluid which provides some kind of cushioning or protection to the joints. Now because of this synovial fluid, there is also an adequate nutrient supply within your joint capsule where there is no blood supply reaching. Also, it is only because of this synovial fluid that wastes are easily extracted from the joint cavity through the synovial membrane. Now, especially in the older populace or people who had some kind of injury, the movement of the synovial fluid becomes limited. So especially for these kind of people, it is more and more important to devote some time towards loosening practices or Sukshma Vyayam practices. So therefore, practice of Sukshma Vyayam is one very easy way to safeguard yourself and protect yourself from future injuries. If you're not doing these Sukshma Vyayam or the loosening practices, what will happen is there will be some unnecessary amount of friction that is created, and your bones will probably rub against each other, and it will gradually lead to some kind of damage or some kind of degeneration. Now, coming to the next point, which is very important, which is very critical, which each yoga student, practitioner, teacher needs to be mindful of, is we all need to know what stops me from doing a particular posture or from going deeper into a particular posture. Now, in order to understand this, what stops me, you have to understand that when you are performing any particular asanas or particular postures, there are two kind of stresses that you're subjecting your body to. The first stress is called as muscular tension, and the second kind of stress is called as compression. Now let us see what this muscular tension is. Now, this muscular tension is something that happens not only in the muscles but also in the connective tissues such as your tendons and also your ligaments. So, what it means is that these tissues can stretch no more. It means that these tissues, these connective tissues or the muscles are offering some kind of resistance to the stretch. Now, this is called as muscle tension. Now let me explain this to you with the help of an example. Now suppose if you have got tight hamstrings or short hamstrings, it will be very difficult for you to reach the full expression of a posture like Paschimottanasana. Now the full expression of Paschimottanasana is where your forehead is touching the knee or maybe even going beyond the knee, and your chest and the abdomen is touching the thigh and your elbows are grounded. But if you have tight hamstrings, if you have tightness or shortness in your posterior chain, it will be very difficult for you to reach the full expression of this posture. So you were not able to do this posture because of muscular tension in your hamstrings or muscular tension anywhere in your posterior chain. Another example could be that of Hastapadasana or Padhastasana. Again, the same thing. If you have tightened hamstring or maybe shortened hamstrings, you will not be able to reach the full expression of the posture, which is the forehead reaching the knee or maybe even going beyond the knee. So this was all about muscular tension. Now coming to the next point, which is compression. Now let us see what this compression is. Now compression is the sensation of tissues being pressed or pushed against each other. Now simply put, compression occurs when one part of the body is colliding against some other part, restricting your movement in that direction. This is called as compression. Now this compression can be of three types. Now what are these three types of compressions? Let us see. Now the first compression is soft compression. Now soft compression happens when flesh on one part of the body comes in contact with flesh of some other part of the body. Now let me explain this. Now once again, the example that I'll take is Paschimottanasana. Now when you have reached the full expression of Paschimottanasana, you are not able to go deeper into the posture. Why? Because the flesh of your stomach, the flesh of your chest is pressing against the flesh of your thigh. There is some kind of resistance that is offered by the flesh of your thigh, and you are not able to go any more deeper into the posture. But this soft compression at times can be worked upon very easily. Now suppose if I am desirous of going deeper into the posture, what I'll simply do is I will abduct my legs. That is, from keeping the legs together, I will open up my legs and then I will try down. Then I'll go down. Perhaps my forehead will be able to touch the ground. So soft compression is something that can be worked upon if one so desires. Now, coming to the next kind of compression, the next kind of compression is a medium compression where the bones are compressing against some flesh. Now, once again, I'll explain this with the help of an example. A very common example here can be a lunge posture, that is Anjaneyasana. So, when you are into Anjaneyasana, what can happen is that your pelvic bone or your pelvis can compress the flesh in your thigh, causing medium compression. Now, this medium compression can also be felt in postures where you are going into deep hip flexion and you are bringing your thighs and your knees close to the chest. For example, Ananda Balasana or maybe Pavan Muktasana to some extent. So again, what is happening here is that some bony structure of your body, could be the pelvis, it will be compressing the flesh maybe on your stomach or maybe the flesh on your thighs. So this kind of compression is called as a medium compression. Now lastly, the last kind of compression is a bone-to-bone compression. Now I will once again explain this with the help of an example, and I'll be taking the example of a back bend. Now suppose if you have worked your way through muscular tension in a back bend, ultimately what will stop you is compression. Now suppose this is my back bend. Why I'm not able to go further into my back bend could be two reasons. One could be muscular tension, and muscular tension is felt on the front part of a body when you are bending backwards. And if you have worked your way, if you practiced enough to do away with this muscular tension which is felt in the anterior part of the body, sooner or later the thing that will stop you from going deeper into your back bend is compression. So what will happen is the spinous processes of your vertebrae. Now what is the spinous process? Now these spinous processes are bony protrusions out of the vertebral column. Okay, so these spinous processes will tend to collide against each other if you keep on going deeper and deeper into a back bend. If you have worked your way through the muscular tension and if you are still continuing to go deeper into the back bend, sooner or later you will meet resistance from bone to bone compression by way of the spinous processes of the vertebral column hitting against each other. And when that is happening, it can lead to some kind of degenerative conditions like osteoarthritis, or it can also lead to some more serious and grave injuries in the future. So these were the three kinds of compressions. The first was soft compression, the second was medium compression, and lastly we saw hard compression. Now also it is noteworthy here that to some extent compression is desirable. Why it is desirable is because compression in moderate amounts will make your bones stronger. But anything beyond that will only be a cause of damage. So therefore, as a yoga student, as a yoga practitioner, it is very important, it is vital that you understand and know what is stopping you. And if you feel that it is muscular tension which is stopping you, muscular tension is something that can be worked upon gradually. Now, as you practice more and more, you will feel this muscular tension easing out. As you progress in your practice, there will be a gradual decrease in muscular tension. And when there is a decrease in the muscular tension, there will be an increase in flexibility. And especially for beginners, it is muscular tension which stops you. However, if you feel that it is not muscular tension that is stopping you, but it is compression, you have to understand and you have to accept that you have reached your end range. Now, if you still go beyond that, if you still are desirous of going beyond that, then you will surely be damaging yourself. So, therefore, if you have hit bone to bone